My stepfather, Calvin, looked at the small velvet box I had placed on the table with absolute disgust before swiping it onto the marble floor. The sound of it hitting the tiles echoed through the silence of the room. He did not even bother to open it. My mother, Beatrice, stood beside him, adjusting her pearls, her face twisted in that familiar mix of pity and annoyance. "You are 32 years old, Sophia," she hissed loud enough for the entire party to hear. "And you are still bringing us cheap trinkets and eating our food. You are a freeloader, a parasite. We do not want your gift. We want you to leave and take your bad luck with you." I looked down at the box on the floor. Inside was the deed to their house fully paid off, along with a check for $500,000. I bent down, picked up the box, and dusted it off. I smiled at them, a calm, terrifying smile. "Okay," I said softly. "I will leave. But remember, you refused the gift." Before I tell you what happened when they finally realized what was in that box, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the very people who are supposed to support you. My name is Sophia, and for years my family has viewed me as the black sheep. The failure. The one who did not marry rich or become an internet celebrity like my younger sister. Growing up in the affluent Buckhead district of Atlanta, appearances were everything. My parents, Beatrice and Calvin, were masters of illusion. They drove leased luxury cars and wore designer clothes with the tags tucked in so they could return them later. They were obsessed with looking wealthy, while I was obsessed with actually becoming wealthy. I work as a senior forensic accountant. Essentially, I hunt down hidden money for the federal government and Fortune 500 companies. I make more in a month than my stepfather makes in 2 years, but they do not know that. To them, I am just Sophia, who does some boring office work and drives a beaten-up 2012 Honda Civic. That afternoon, driving to their 30th wedding anniversary, I knew exactly what I was walking into. I adjusted the rearview mirror, checking my reflection. I was wearing a bespoke black suit tailored in Milan. To the untrained eye, it was simple. To anyone who knew quality, the fabric screamed power. But I knew my mother would hate it. I pulled up to the gate of the rented estate they were using for the party. A security guard in an ill-fitting uniform stepped out, holding up his hand. He looked at my dented Honda, then at me, and smirked. "Deliveries are around the back, miss," he said, barely looking me in the eye. I rolled down the window. "I am not a delivery driver. I am a guest. Sophia Vance. My parents are the hosts." The guard let out a short, mocking laugh. He looked down at his clipboard, pretending to scan it. "Vance. Vance. Nope. Don't see a Sophia Vance on the VIP list. Look, honey, if you are here to drop off the catering or clean the toilets, just go to the service entrance. We have Bentleys and Porsches coming through here. We cannot have this piece of junk blocking the driveway." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. This was typical. My parents probably told security to filter out anyone who did not look the part. "Call Beatrice Vance," I said calmly. "Tell her Sophia is here." He rolled his eyes but grabbed his radio. A moment later, the wrought iron gates buzzed open, but not before he gave me one last dismissive wave. As I drove up the winding driveway, I saw my mother standing on the front porch. She was not smiling. She looked like she was about to have a stroke. She was frantically waving her hands, signaling me to steer away from the main entrance. I ignored her and pulled right up to the front steps, parking directly behind a rented white Rolls-Royce. As I stepped out of the car, the humid Atlanta air hit me, but it was nothing compared to the heat coming from my mother's glare. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, rushing down the stairs. Her heels clicked aggressively on the pavement. "Move this rust bucket immediately. The mayor is arriving in 10 minutes. Do you want him to think we are running a junkyard?" "Hello to you too, Mother," I said, locking the car door with a deliberate click. "Happy anniversary." She ignored my greeting, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. Her lip curled in distaste as she took in my black suit. "Oh God, Sophia. Really?" She gestured vaguely at my outfit. "It is a pearl anniversary. Pearl. White. Cream. Elegant. You look like you are going to a funeral, or like you are one of the wait staff. Did you do this on purpose? Did you wear black just to curse our marriage? It is a $2,000 suit, Mother, I thought to myself, but out loud I just said, it is professional. And I'm comfortable. Comfortable, she scoffed, grabbing my arm and pulling me away from the front door. You are selfish. That is what you are, always trying to dampen the mood with your depressing vibe. Listen to me clearly. You are not going in the front door. Excuse me. I pulled my arm back. You heard me. The photographer is setting up in the foyer for the grand entrance photos. I do not want you in the background ruining the aesthetic. You go around to the kitchen entrance and stay in the back until everyone is seated. I stared at her. She was serious. She wanted her own daughter to enter through the servant's entrance because my car and my clothes did not fit her Instagram aesthetic. Fine, I said. I did not want to cause a scene. Not yet. As I walked along the side of the house toward the kitchen, I passed the large bay windows of the dining hall. I could see the decorations inside. From a distance, it looked lavish. But up close, walking past the windows, I saw the truth. My forensic eye never turns off. I noticed the tags still dangling from the bottom of the silk drapes. Rental tags. I saw the floral centerpieces. They were high-quality silk, not real flowers. Reusable. And the silverware on the tables was mismatched, likely cobbled together from different rental sets to save money. It was all a facade. A desperate hollow shell of wealth, just like their love for me. I pushed open the heavy kitchen door and stepped into the chaos of the catering staff. The smell of roasted chicken and heavy perfume filled the air. My stepfather Calvin was standing by the island pouring himself a glass of expensive scotch. His tie was already loosened and his face was flushed. He looked up as I entered, his eyes narrowing. "Ah, look who decided to show up!" He boomed, his voice thick with false joviality that did not mask the disdain. The prodigal daughter. Or should I say the charity case? "Hello, Calvin," I said, brushing past a waiter carrying a tray of champagne. He blocked my path, swirling his drink. "You know your mother was crying this morning. She was worried you would not bring a gift. She said Calvin Sophia is struggling, maybe we should not expect anything." But I told her nonsense. Sophia has been living rent-free in her grandmother's house for 10 years. Surely she has saved up enough pennies to buy her parents something nice for once. I felt a muscle in my jaw twitch. Living rent-free. That was the narrative they spun. The truth was, I had bought that house from the bank quietly when it was about to be foreclosed on 10 years ago. They had no idea I was their landlord. "I brought a gift," I said, patting my purse where the velvet box sat. "Do not worry." He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Good. Because God knows you owe us. I raised you. I put a roof over your head when your real father ran off. And how do you repay me? By sulking around in cheap suits and driving a car that belongs in a compactor." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of alcohol and expensive cigars. "Just try not to embarrass us today, Sophia. Your sister Jasmine is bringing her new husband, Kyle. He is a big shot in the tech world. Real money. Not whatever pennies you scrape together. Try to learn something from them." I stared at him, my expression unmoving. I knew about Kyle. My team had been investigating a crypto scheme for the past 3 months. The name Kyle Jenkins was at the top of our suspect list. But Calvin did not know that. He only saw the rented Lamborghinis and the flash. "I will do my best, Calvin," I said. Just then, a roar of an engine echoed from the front driveway. It was loud, obnoxious, and demanding of attention. Calvin's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. "That must be them," he shouted, forgetting about me instantly. He rushed out of the kitchen, adjusting his tie. Jasmine, Kyle. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by strangers in catering uniforms. One of the servers, an older woman with kind eyes, looked at me. "Can I get you a drink, honey?" she asked softly. "You look like you need one." I smiled at her, a genuine smile this time. "Sparkling water, please. I need to keep a clear head. The show is just beginning." I took the glass and walked towards the swinging doors that led to the main hall. I could hear the applause. I could hear my mother's high-pitched fake laughter. I adjusted my cuffs, feeling the cool metal of my watch against my wrist. They wanted a show. They wanted to talk about money and success and worth. Well, I was about to give them a masterclass. I pushed open the doors and stepped into the lion's den. The heavy double doors of the kitchen swung shut behind me, muting the sound of the string quartet playing in the foyer. The air in here was different, thick with the scent of roasted duck and the sharp metallic tang of tension. Standing by the center island was Calvin, my stepfather. He was dressed in a tuxedo that was a size too small, the fabric straining against his midsection, a visual reminder of his refusal to accept reality. In his hand, he held a crystal tumbler filled with amber liquid. I recognized the bottle on the counter immediately. Johnny Walker Blue Label. $200 a bottle. It was an extravagant choice for a man who had called me 3 times last week claiming he could not afford to fix the leaking roof. He did not turn around when I entered, but I knew he sensed my presence. He took a slow, deliberate sip of the scotch, savoring it with a performance of wealth that made my stomach turn. I walked further into the room, my heels clicking on the tile, a sound that usually commanded respect in boardrooms, but here only seemed to annoy him. "Hello, Calvin," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He lowered the glass, but did not look at me. He stared at the catering staff, who were hurriedly plating appetizers, his eyes critical and demanding. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and laced with a familiar venom. "You have some nerve showing your face here, Sophia." I paused, placing my clutch on the counter. "I was invited. It is your anniversary." He spun around, then his face flushed a deep, unhealthy red. It was not just the alcohol. It was the rage that seemed to simmer just beneath his skin whenever I was around. "I am not talking about the party," he snapped. "I am talking about the first of the month. It came and went, Sophia. And my bank account is still looking lighter than it should be. Or did you forget about your obligations?" I stared at him, genuinely confused for a split second before the realization hit me. He was trying to shake me down. Again. Since I turned 18, Calvin had concocted this insane narrative that I owed him what he called a retroactive raising fee. He kept a mental ledger of every meal I ate, every pair of shoes he bought, and every field trip he paid for when I was a child. He believed I should be paying him back with interest. "I did not forget," I said, my voice hardening. "I transferred $2,000 to your personal account on the morning of the 1st. I have the transaction ID on my phone right now if you want to see it." Calvin scoffed, waving his hand dismissively as if my proof was irrelevant. $2,000. You say it like it is a fortune. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain a lifestyle like this? To keep up this house? I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. I knew exactly what it cost to keep up the house, because I was the one paying the mortgage, the property taxes, and the insurance through my holding company. The $2,000 I gave him directly was supposed to be for groceries and utilities, but clearly it was being diverted elsewhere. "That is the agreed amount, Calvin," I said. "And it is more than generous, considering I do not actually live here." "Generous." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. The smell of scotch and stale tobacco was overwhelming. "You call that generous? After I took you in. After I raised another man's child as my own. You are ungrateful, Sophia. You have always been ungrateful." That money was gone the moment it hit the account. Bills pile up. Debts need to be paid. I looked him dead in the eye, my forensic accountant brain analyzing the situation instantly. His hands were shaking slightly. There was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. And he was aggressive far more than usual. These were not the signs of a man paying utility bills. These were the signs of a man chasing a loss. "It was gone the moment it hit the account," I repeated slowly. "That is interesting, because I checked the transaction logs. The money cleared. So if it is gone, it did not go to the electric company." "Did the Falcons lose again this weekend, Calvin?" The silence that followed was deafening. The catering staff, who had been pretending to be invisible, suddenly stopped moving. The clinking of silverware ceased. Calvin froze, his eyes widening in shock that I had dared to voice his secret addiction out loud. I had hit the nerve. I knew about his gambling problem. I knew he spent his days at the off-track betting parlors or glued to sports betting apps chasing the high of a big win that never came. His face contorted, shifting from shock to pure, unadulterated fury. "How dare you?" he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "You come into my house, drink my liquor, eat my food, and then you dare to judge me. You think you are better than me because you have a little desk job. You are nothing." He raised his arm. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me. Instead, he hurled the crystal glass across the room. It smashed against the floor just inches from my polished black boots. Shards of crystal exploded outward, scattering across the pristine white tiles. The amber liquid splashed onto my trousers, leaving a dark stain on the expensive fabric. A young waitress gasped and dropped a spoon, the sound ringing out like a gunshot in the tense room. Calvin stood there, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. He pointed a shaking finger at the mess on the floor. "Clean it up," he barked. I looked at the shattered glass, then back at him. "Excuse me," I said. "Clean it up," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Since you want to act like you know everything, you can make yourself useful. That is the only thing you are good for anyway. Cleaning up messes. You are not a guest here, Sophia. You are a freeloader. Now get on your knees and clean up my floor before the real guests see it." The disrespect was absolute. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted to break me down in front of the staff to remind me of my place in his hierarchy. He expected me to cry. He expected me to run away or to beg for his forgiveness. But I was not the scared little girl he used to bully anymore. I was a grown woman who held the deed to the very floor he was standing on. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my jacket. I did not look at the mess. I looked straight at him, channeling every ounce of cold, professional detachment I used when interrogating white-collar criminals. "No," I said simply. Calvin blinked, taken aback. "What did you say to me?" I said. "No. I am not your maid, Calvin. And I suggest you be careful. Stress is bad for your blood pressure, and you are going to need your health for what is coming next." I turned my back on him. I could hear him sputtering, choking on his own rage, grasping for words that would hurt me. "You walk away from me and do not ever come back," he screamed at my back. "You are cut off. Do you hear me? Not another dime." I walked toward the swinging doors, stepping carefully over the broken glass. I did not look back. Let him think he had the power. Let him think he could cut me off. It would only make the moment I cut the power to this entire house all the more satisfying. I pushed through the doors and into the hallway, leaving the toxicity of the kitchen behind, only to prepare myself for the circus that awaited me in the dining room. I checked my phone. A text from my assistant confirmed that the dossier on Kyle was ready and uploaded to the cloud. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Calvin thought a broken glass was a disaster. He had no idea that I was about to shatter his entire world. The real storm was just beginning. The vibration of a high-performance engine rattled the front windows before the car even appeared in the driveway. It was a sound designed to demand attention, an aggressive roar that silenced the polite chatter of the party guests. I stepped out of the hallway just in time to see a lime-green Lamborghini Huracan tear up the pavement, stopping inches from the front steps with a dramatic screech of tires. It was ostentatious, loud, and completely out of place for a 30th anniversary celebration. But looking at my parents' faces, you would think the Pope himself had just arrived in the Pope-mobile. My mother Beatrice, who had just moments ago been screaming at me about using the servants' entrance, practically sprinted down the front steps. Her face transformed instantly from a mask of irritation to one of pure, adoring worship. "They are here!" she squealed, clapping her hands together like a teenager. "Everyone look, Jasmine and Kyle have arrived." The doors of the sports car swung upward, and out stepped my half-sister Jasmine. She was dressed in a shimmering gold dress that was far too tight and far too short for a daytime family gathering. It was the kind of outfit worn by someone who desperately needed to prove they had money. She paused for a moment, waiting for the applause, flipping her long, expensive weave over her shoulder. On the driver's side, her husband Kyle emerged. He was wearing a white linen suit and sunglasses, despite the fact that we were standing under the shade of the porch. He slammed the car door shut and tossed the keys carelessly toward the security guard, who scrambled to catch them, looking terrified of scratching the paint. "Jasmine, my baby, my golden girl," my mother cried out, embracing her tightly. "You look stunning, absolutely stunning, like a movie star." Jasmine pulled away slightly, careful not to wrinkle her dress. "Hi, Mom. Happy anniversary. Sorry we are late. We had a meeting with some investors for Kyle's new project. You know how it is. Money never sleeps." Of course, Beatrice cooed, ushering them up the stairs. I stood by the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching the performance. My forensic accountant brain automatically began dissecting the scene. I looked at the Lamborghini. It had a small barcode sticker on the bottom left of the windshield, barely visible unless you knew where to look. It was a rental. A weekend exotic rental, probably costing them $2,000 a day. They did not own it. Then my eyes moved to Jasmine. She was holding a bright orange handbag, positioning it prominently on her arm so everyone could see the logo. My mother gasped as she spotted it. "Oh my goodness, Jasmine. Is that the new Birkin? The one on the wait list?" Jasmine beamed, patting the bag lovingly. "Yes. Kyle surprised me with it this morning. He said a woman of my status should not be seen carrying anything less. It cost $20,000, but he said I am worth every penny." The guests oohed and awed, staring at the bag with envy. My mother looked like she might faint from pride, but from where I was standing I could see the truth. I own 2 authentic Birkins kept in dust bags in my climate-controlled closet. I know the stitching, I know the hardware. The gold plating on Jasmine's bag was a shade too yellow. The stitching on the handle was machine perfect, not the slight organic variance of hand stitching. It was a fake. A very good one, likely a high-end replica from the black market, but a fake nonetheless. It was worth maybe $300, not $20,000. I said nothing. I just watched them lie. Then Beatrice's eyes landed on me. The warmth vanished from her face, instantly replaced by that familiar sneer. She looked down at my feet. I was wearing a pair of custom-made Italian leather boots. They were understated, handcrafted from the finest calfskin, and cost more than the catering for this entire party. They were built for comfort and power, designed for women who walked into boardrooms and took control. "Sophia," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Why are you standing there like a statue? And look at those shoes. Heavens! Did you pick those up at a flea market? They are so clunky. Look at your sister's heels. Those are Louboutins. That is class. You really need to stop buying your clothes from thrift bins if you want to be taken seriously." Jasmine giggled, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. "Oh, Mom, stop. Not everyone has my taste. Besides, maybe Sophia likes the construction worker look. It suits her lifestyle." I felt a flash of irritation but forced my face to remain neutral. My construction worker boots were bespoke. Her Louboutins were from 3 seasons ago, and judging by the scuff on the heel, she had bought them secondhand. But I let them have their moment. Then Kyle stepped forward. He took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were cold and arrogant. He looked me up and down, not with desire, but with the kind of dismissive appraisal one gives to a piece of furniture they intend to throw away. He ran a hand through his gelled hair and smirked. "Hey, Sophia," he said, his voice loud enough to carry over the crowd. "Good to see you. I was asking Jasmine if you were going to make it. I know gas prices are up, figured that might be a struggle for you right now." I smiled tightly. "Hello, Kyle. I managed just fine." He chuckled, shaking his head as if I were a cute but dim child. Good. Listen, I was actually going to text you. My new crypto startup MetaCoin is exploding right now. We are moving into a new office downtown next month. We are looking for support staff. You know, someone to handle the coffee runs, organize the filing cabinets, keep the break room tidy. He paused for effect, looking around at the guests to make sure they were listening to his benevolence. "It pays $15 an hour," he continued. Which, let's be honest, is probably double whatever you are making doing your little freelance bookkeeping gigs. Plus, you would get to be around real entrepreneurs. You could learn a thing or two about how the real world works. I told the HR manager I would put in a good word for you, as a favor to the family. The crowd chuckled. My stepfather Calvin slapped Kyle on the back, grinning. That is generous of you, son. Very generous. Sophia, you should thank him. It is not every day you get offered a job at $1 billion company. I looked at Kyle. I looked at his smug, self-satisfied face. He talked about Metacoin like it was the next Apple. What he did not know was that my team at the agency had been tracking Metacoin's wallet addresses for months. We knew it was a classic Ponzi scheme. We knew he was using new investor money to pay for that rental Lamborghini and that fake bag. We knew he was hemorrhaging cash and was currently under investigation by the SEC for securities fraud. He was offering me a job as a coffee girl at a company that was about to be raided by the FBI. The urge to destroy him right there was overwhelming. I wanted to laugh in his face. I wanted to tell him that my hourly consultation rate was higher than his entire net worth. But it was not time yet. The trap had to be perfect. Thank you, Kyle. I said, my voice smooth and calm. That is a very interesting offer. I will definitely keep it in mind. It is always good to have options, especially in such a volatile market. He smirked, missing the double meaning entirely. Volatile for some, maybe. Not for us. We are going to the moon, Sophia. Try not to get left behind on Earth with your old Honda. Come on, darling, Jasmine said, linking her arm through his. Let's go get a drink. I need to show off my bag to Aunt Sarah before she leaves. They swept past me, a cloud of expensive perfume and cheap arrogance trailing in their wake. My parents followed them like eager puppies, leaving me standing alone near the doorway. I watched them go, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. Go ahead, I thought. Enjoy your champagne. Enjoy your rental car. Enjoy your fake bag. Because in about an hour, when I open that gift box, the only thing you are going to be going to is a federal prison cell. I reached into my pocket and touched the cool surface of my phone. A notification blinked on the screen. It was an email from my lead investigator. Subject: Kyle Jenkins. Sealed indictment. Status active. I cleared the notification and walked toward the dining area. The show was heating up, and I had the best seat in the house. The dining room filled up quickly, transforming into a theater of the absurd, where the price of admission was your dignity. I watched from the periphery as my extended family flooded in a sea of sequins, velvet, and rented tuxedos. These were my aunts, uncles, and cousins, people who measured human worth by the size of a rim or the label on a handbag. They greeted my parents with exaggerated hugs and loud performative laughter, their eyes darting around the room to assess the cost of the decorations. It was a Shark Tank, and Jasmine was the blood in the water that attracted them all. She held court in the center of the room, spinning a web of lies, so thick I was surprised she did not choke on it. She was telling Aunt Sarah and Uncle Marcus about her upcoming brand trip to Dubai. The sheikh specifically requested me. Jasmine lied effortlessly, taking a sip of champagne. They are flying us out on a private jet. Total luxury. I might even look into buying a vacation property on the Palm Jumeirah while we are there. Kyle says real estate in the Middle East is the next big boom. The guests gasped in admiration, hanging on her every word. I stood near the wall, sipping my sparkling water, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. I knew for a fact that Jasmine's passport had expired 2 years ago, and the only trip she had booked was a weekend in Miami that was currently being disputed by her credit card company. But nobody here cared about the truth. They only cared about the glitter. I finally decided to find my seat. I scanned the long, elegantly set main table where my parents sat at the head, flanked by Jasmine and Kyle. There were name cards placed on fine china plates, written in calligraphy. I walked down the length of the table looking for my name. It was not next to my parents. It was not next to my cousins. It was not even at the end of the main table. I found my place sitting at a small, wobbly card table pushed into the corner near the swinging kitchen doors. It was the kind of table you set up for children who are too loud to sit with the adults. There was no crystal wine glass at my seat, just a generic water tumbler. The napkins were paper, not linen. It was a calculated petty insult designed to make me feel small, to remind me that in the hierarchy of the Vance family, I was barely above the hired help. I sat down, my back straight, my expression unreadable. I pulled out my phone to check on the status of the foreclosure paperwork, finding comfort in the cold, hard facts of the law amidst this emotional circus. "Oh, look who is sitting all the way over there!" a shrill voice called out. I looked up to see Aunt Patrice looming over me. She was a heavy-set woman who wore too much jewelry and had a habit of asking invasive questions under the guise of concern. She held a glass of red wine dangerously close to my shoulder. "Hello, Aunt Patrice," I said politely. She pursed her lips, looking me up and down. "Still wearing black, I see. And still single. I heard your cousin Vanessa just got engaged to a neurosurgeon. He bought her a ring the size of a grape. When are you going to settle down, Sophia? Or are you too busy with your— what is it you do again? Filing papers." "I am a forensic accountant, Aunt Patrice," I corrected gently, "and I am focusing on my career right now. I am very happy." "Happy," she scoffed. "A woman is not happy without a husband, dear. You are 32. The clock is ticking. You do not want to end up alone with nothing but your files to keep you warm. Maybe you should lower your standards. Not everyone can catch a prize like Kyle." Before I could respond, my mother's voice cut through the air like a serrated knife. She had walked over to join the conversation, clearly delighting in seeing me cornered. "Don't waste your breath, Patrice," Beatrice said, placing a possessive hand on Aunt Patrice's arm. "We have tried to set her up. I even asked the gardener if he had a single brother. But honestly," Beatrice lowered her voice to a stage whisper that was meant to be heard, "even a dog would not want her. She has no personality, no charm. She is just plain cold. Men want warmth, Sophia. They want a woman, not a calculator." A few cousins nearby snickered. Aunt Patrice looked at me with faux pity. "Oh, Beatrice, do not be so harsh. Maybe she just needs a makeover. Jasmine could help her." I picked up my water glass, my hand perfectly steady. The insult was vile, designed to strip me of my femininity and my humanity. But coming from a woman who was technically homeless and living in a house owned by the daughter she despised, the words lost their sting. They were just noise. "I think I will pass on the makeover," I said calmly. "I prefer to rely on my intelligence rather than my contouring." My mother glared at me, her mouth opening to deliver another barb, but she was interrupted by a loud, booming laugh from the main table. It was Kyle. He was standing up, holding a glass of wine, surrounded by Uncle Marcus and several other male relatives who were listening to him with rapt attention. "The thing about the blockchain," Kyle announced, his voice projecting across the room, "is that it is totally untraceable, tax-free wealth. See, when I bought the Lamborghini, I wrote it off as a marketing expense for Metacoin. That is the beauty of decentralized finance. You can wash your assets through the crypto wallets and the IRS cannot touch you. It is a loophole for the smart guys. That is how the rich stay rich, gentlemen. We do not pay taxes on capital gains if we move it fast enough." Uncle Marcus nodded sagely. "Is that right? I have been worried about my portfolio taxes." "Oh, absolutely," Kyle continued, puffing out his chest. "My accountant set it up so that any loss in crypto offsets my income tax to zero. It is called a wash sale, totally legal if you know the right people." I felt a physical reaction in my brain. It was the same feeling I got when I saw a red flag in a ledger. He was not just spouting nonsense. He was admitting to federal crimes in a room full of witnesses. And he was wrong. Painfully, dangerously wrong. I could not help myself. The professional in me overrode the daughter. "Actually, that is incorrect," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was clear, cutting through the murmurs of the dining room. The conversation at the main table stopped. Kyle turned to look at me, blinking in confusion. "Excuse me?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "Did the little secretary say something?" I stood up slowly, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. I walked toward the main table, stopping just outside the circle of men. "I said that is incorrect, Kyle. I spoke clearly, my tone devoid of emotion. The IRS closed the wash sale loophole for cryptocurrency assets, and while the specific legislation is still evolving, claiming a personal luxury vehicle, like a Lamborghini, as a marketing expense, without proper commercial usage logs, is an immediate audit trigger. Furthermore, blockchain is not untraceable. Every transaction is recorded on a public ledger. If you are moving assets to avoid capital gains taxes, that is not a loophole. That is tax evasion under Title 26 of the United States Code, and it carries a penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison per count. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Uncle Marcus looked from me to Kyle, his brow furrowed. Kyle's face turned a shade of purple that clashed horribly with his linen suit. He let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Whoa, listen to her," he stammered, looking around for support. "She reads one article on Google and thinks she is an expert. Stick to balancing checkbooks, Sophia. This is high-level finance. You wouldn't understand the complexity of what we do." I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. I understand enough to know that a wash sale rule applies when you sell or trade securities at a loss and buy significantly identical securities within 30 days, I countered effortlessly. And I understand that admitting to structuring transactions to hide assets from the IRS in front of a room full of people is incredibly reckless. But please continue explaining how you are smarter than the federal government. I am sure the agents investigating your sector would love to hear your theories. Kyle opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. For the first time, the arrogance cracked, revealing the panic underneath. He knew that I knew. He just didn't know how much. My mother slammed her hand on the table, breaking the silence. "Enough," she shrieked, her face contorted with embarrassment. "Sophia, sit down. You are ruining the dinner. You are just jealous because Kyle is a genius and you are a nobody. Stop trying to sound smart. You are embarrassing yourself." I looked at Kyle one last time. He refused to meet my gaze suddenly, very interested in his wineglass. I had planted the seed of fear. Now it was time to let it grow. "My apologies, Mother," I said, turning back to my little card table in the corner. "I just hate to see misinformation being spread. Please enjoy your appetizers." I sat back down at the kids' table, ignoring the whispers that erupted around the room. I took a sip of my water. It tasted refreshing. The first layer of their facade had been chipped away. Kyle was rattled. My parents were furious. And I was just getting started. The main course was coming, and with it, the end of their world. The waitstaff cleared the dinner plates, the clatter of china acting as a prelude to the main event my mother had been waiting for all evening. Beatrice tapped her spoon against her champagne flute, a sharp, piercing sound that silenced the room instantly. She stood up, her face flushed with wine and the adrenaline of being the center of attention. "All right, everyone," she announced, beaming at the crowd. "It is time for the gifts. Now I told my girls not to get us anything too extravagant, but you know how they are. Especially Jasmine. She just has such a generous heart." She gestured dramatically toward Jasmine, who was already standing holding a large, shimmering gold envelope tied with a silk ribbon. Jasmine walked around the table, her hips swaying, ensuring every eye in the room was fixed on her. She handed the envelope to Beatrice with a theatrical flourish, pausing just long enough for the photographer in the corner to snap a picture. "Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad," Jasmine said, her voice trembling with feigned emotion. "Kyle and I wanted to give you something that reflects how much you mean to us. Something that matches the lifestyle you deserve." Beatrice tore open the envelope, her hands shaking. She pulled out a glossy, heavy cardstock brochure. As she read the cover, her eyes widened, and she let out a scream that could have shattered glass. "Oh my God! Calvin, look!" she shrieked, clutching the brochure to her chest before turning it around to show the room. "It is a Cruise A Mediterranean cruise." The room erupted in applause. Calvin grabbed the brochure, his mouth hanging open. "The Royal Onyx Line." he gasped. "This is the 5-star package. The owner's suite, Jasmine. This must have cost a fortune." Jasmine shrugged modestly, looking down at her fingernails. "Well, nothing is too good for you guys. It is an all-inclusive 14-day trip. Italy, Greece, France. First-class flights included. Kyle and I just put it on the card. We did not want you to worry about a thing." My mother burst into tears, throwing her arms around Jasmine. "You are an angel," she sobbed into Jasmine's shoulder. "An absolute angel. I have always dreamed of seeing Santorini. I cannot believe it. You are the best daughter a mother could ask for." I sat at my wobbly card table watching the performance with a mixture of amusement and pity. From where I sat, I could see the back of the brochure Calvin was holding. I recognized the logo of the travel agency. It was a boutique firm downtown that I had investigated 2 years ago for inflating prices. But more importantly, I knew their policy. They printed these beautiful, high-gloss presentation itineraries for a non-refundable deposit of $500. The actual balance, the $50,000 for the owner's suite and the first-class flights, was not due until 30 days before departure. I looked at Jasmine. She was smiling, basking in the adoration, but there was a tightness around her eyes. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple. She knew she had not paid for that trip. She had bought a $500 piece of paper to buy her parents' love for the evening, hoping that by the time the bill came due she would have scammed enough money from somewhere else to cover it. Or more likely, she would come up with some excuse about a scheduling conflict or a travel ban to cancel it later, keeping the glory without paying the price. It was a classic Ponzi move. Selling a dream you do not own. Beatrice finally pulled away from Jasmine, wiping her eyes with a linen napkin. She looked at the brochure one more time, caressing it like a holy relic. "I am just so overwhelmed," she sniffed. "This is real love. This is what family does. They sacrifice to make each other happy." Then the atmosphere in the room shifted. The warmth that had filled the space during Jasmine's reveal evaporated instantly as Beatrice turned her head slowly, deliberately toward my corner. The guests followed her gaze. 50 pairs of eyes landed on me. "And then there is Sophia," Beatrice said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all its sweetness. Calvin placed the brochure down on the table with reverence and crossed his arms, staring at me with a look of pure disappointment. "Well, Sophia," he prompted, "your sister just gave us the Mediterranean. What did you bring? Or did you leave it in your other suit?" I reached down and picked up the small black velvet box I had placed by my feet. It was unassuming. No gold ribbon, no glitter, just a simple high-quality box that fit in the palm of my hand. I stood up and walked toward the main table. The silence was heavy, suffocating. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I placed the box on the table in front of them, right next to the glossy cruise brochure. The contrast was stark. The flash of the fake cruise versus the dark, solid reality of my gift. "Happy anniversary," I said quietly. Beatrice looked at the box, not making a move to touch it. She let out a short, derisive laugh. "Look at the size of it, Calvin," she mocked, looking at the guests for validation. "It is tiny." "What is inside, Sophia?" "Let me guess. Is it one of those scented candles you make in your apartment to save money? Or maybe a coupon book, good for one free hug?" The guests chuckled. A few cousins whispered behind their hands. "It is small," Calvin agreed, poking the box with his index finger as if it were contaminated. "You know, Sophia, it is not about the money, it is about the effort." Jasmine went out of her way to plan an experience. This looks like something you grabbed from a gas station counter on your way here." "It is not a candle," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Open it." Beatrice sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of suffering. She picked up the box with 2 fingers, treating it like a dead insect. "Fine," she said. "Let's get this over with so we can get back to talking about our trip to Italy." She flipped the lid open. Because of the angle, the guests could not see what was inside. Only Beatrice and Calvin could see the contents. I watched their faces closely. I expected confusion. I expected silence. Instead, Beatrice frowned. She reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper and a check. She did not unfold the paper. She did not look at the numbers on the check. She simply saw paper, and her disappointment manifested as instant rage. Paper, she spat, throwing the contents back onto the table. You gave us paper. What is this? A poem, a letter telling us how hard your life is. She did not even give herself the chance to read the header of the deed. She did not see the bank logo on the cashier's check. She was so blinded by her prejudice, so convinced of my failure, that she could not recognize a fortune when it was staring her in the face. I cannot believe you, Calvin shouted, slamming his hand on the table, causing the silverware to jump. We are celebrating 30 years of building this family, and you insult us with this. Jasmine gives us a vacation. You give us scrap paper. It is not scrap paper, I said, my patience thinning. If you would just read it. I do not want to read your excuses, Beatrice screamed, standing up to loom over me. I am tired of you, Sophia. I am tired of your black suits, your gloomy face, and your cheap gifts. You are a freeloader. That is what you are. You have never contributed anything to this family. You just take and take and take. She picked up the box and the papers, crumpling them in her fist, and shoved them toward my chest. Take it, she hissed. Take your trash and get out of my sight. Go back to your little apartment and leave us alone. We do not need you. We have Jasmine. We have a real daughter. I looked at the crumpled deed in her hand, the deed that transferred full ownership of the house they were standing in back to them, the check for $500,000 that would have cleared their debts. She was crushing it. She was literally crushing her own salvation because she was too hateful to read the fine print. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it. This was the moment of no return. I had given them a chance. A literal, tangible chance to be saved. And they had rejected it with venom. Okay, I said softly. I took the crumpled papers from her hand. I smoothed them out against my chest, folding them neatly back into my pocket. You want me to leave? I asked. Yes, Calvin bellowed, pointing at the door. Get out, and do not come back until you learn some respect. I nodded slowly. I looked at Jasmine, who was smirking behind her champagne glass. I looked at Kyle, who was trying to look busy on his phone to avoid eye contact. I looked at my parents, their faces twisted in ugly, self-righteous anger. Understood, I said. I turned around and began to walk toward the exit. The room was silent again, but this time it was not the silence of anticipation. It was the uncomfortable silence of a family breaking apart in public. But I was not done. I stopped at the doorway. I turned back to face them one last time. You are right, Mother, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. It is just paper. But you really should have read it. I did not wait for a response. I walked out the front door, past the rental Rolls-Royce, past the rental Lamborghini, and toward my paid-off Honda. The humid air felt good on my skin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed the number for the sheriff's department. It was time to execute the eviction. I stopped. My hand froze on the cold brass handle of the front door. I was seconds away from freedom, seconds away from leaving this toxic theater behind forever, but Calvin's voice boomed across the room, anchoring me to the spot. He was not done. He could not let me leave with the upper hand. He needed to crush me one last time to prove to his wealthy guests and his arrogant son-in-law that he was the patriarch, the man in charge, the one who held the keys to the kingdom. Wait just a minute. Sophia, Calvin shouted, the slur in his voice replaced by a sudden manic energy. Do not walk out just yet. You might want to hear this. It concerns you. Or rather, it concerns where you have been squatting for the last decade. I turned around slowly. Calvin was standing on his chair now, tapping a spoon against his glass, commanding the attention of the room like a ringmaster. Jasmine was looking up at him with wide, greedy eyes, and Kyle was leaning back, picking his teeth, looking smug. We have a special announcement, Calvin declared, puffing out his chest. To show our full support for Kyle and Jasmine's future, and to get in on the ground floor of this incredible Metacoin opportunity, Beatrice and I have made a decision. We are liquidating some of our old stagnant assets. He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes locking onto mine with a cruel glint. We accepted a cash offer this morning for the old cottage in Decatur, the one your grandmother left behind. We are selling it to a developer who plans to bulldoze it and build condos. The proceeds will go directly into Kyle's startup. We are talking about a $500,000 injection of capital. The air left my lungs. The world tilted on its axis. That cottage was not just a building. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place in the world where I had ever felt loved. My grandmother, Nana Rose, had left it to me in her will. It was filled with her books, her quilts, the smell of her lavender soap, and every childhood memory I held dear. It was where I lived. It was where I kept the few things that mattered to me. You cannot do that, I said, my voice shaking for the first time that night. I walked back into the room, ignoring the whispers of the guests. That is my house. Nana Rose left it to me. You have no right to sell it. Calvin threw his head back and laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Your house, he sneered. Oh, Sophia, you really are naive. You think just because she liked you better, that makes you the owner? You were 18 when she died. You were a child. You were grieving. You could not handle the responsibility of an estate. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. He waved it in the air like a flag of victory. Do you recognize this? He asked. I squinted at the paper. Even from a distance, I recognized the letterhead. It was a power of attorney document. 10 years ago, he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. You sign this. You gave me full control over your assets and the estate management until you turned 35. You trusted me to handle your affairs because you were too busy crying in your dorm room to deal with property taxes and insurance. This document gives me the legal right to sell, transfer, or liquidate any property in the estate. And guess what, sweetheart? You are only 32. I am still the captain of this ship. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I remembered that day. I was 18, heartbroken, barely able to function after the funeral. Calvin had come to me with a stack of papers telling me they were just formalities for the insurance, just things to keep the lights on. I had signed them without reading. I had trusted him because he was the only father figure I had. He had weaponized my grief. He had stolen my inheritance with a ballpoint pen while I was wiping tears from my eyes. Kyle let out a low whistle. Nice move, Calvin. That is what I call asset management. Turn that dead weight into crypto, and we will double it in 6 months. Condos are the future anyway. Nobody wants those old drafty shacks. Beatrice chimed in, looking at me with pure malice. It is for the best, Sophia. You have been hoarding that house for too long, filling it with your junk. It is time the money served the family. Jasmine deserves a start in life. You can find an apartment, maybe get a roommate. It is time you grew up. They were going to bulldoze my grandmother's garden. They were going to destroy the porch where she taught me to read. And they were going to funnel the money into a Ponzi scheme that would evaporate in weeks. I stood in the center of the room, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it almost felt physical. They had not just stolen my money, they had stolen my past. They had waited until their anniversary in front of everyone to twist the knife. But then something shifted in my mind. I looked at the yellowed paper in Calvin's hand. I looked at the date he was so proudly pointing to. And then I looked at my forensic accountant brain, which remembered every document I had ever filed. Calvin was smiling, thinking he had checkmated me. He thought I was the same helpless 18-year-old girl. He did not know that 3 years ago, when I started my own firm, I had run a full audit on myself. I had found that document, and I had found something else. I took a step closer to him. The sadness in my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Let me see that, I said. Calvin smirked and held it out just out of my reach. Look, but do not touch. It is a legal binding document, Sophia. Signed, sealed, and delivered. I looked at the signature. It was shaky. It was the signature of a grieving child, but then I looked at the notary stamp at the bottom. "You are right, Calvin," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that forced everyone to lean in. I did sign something that day. I signed a limited power of attorney for medical decisions because I was going into surgery for my appendix a month later. I never signed a general power of attorney for property assets. Calvin's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Don't lie. It is right here." I looked closer. The font on the first page was Times New Roman. The font on the signature page was Arial. "That is a Franken document," I announced loud and clear. "You took the signature page from my medical release form and stapled it to a property management contract. And look at the date on the notary stamp, Calvin." I pointed a finger at the paper. The date is August 15th, 2012. I was in London on a study abroad program that entire month. My passport stamps prove it. I was not even in the country to sign that document in front of a notary. The room went silent. Kyle stopped picking his teeth. Beatrice stopped drinking her wine. Calvin looked at the paper, his hands suddenly trembling. That is a clerical error," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "The notary must have put the wrong date." "It is not an error," I said, stepping forward until I was toe-to-toe with him. "It is forgery. It is fraud. And attempting to use a forged document to sell a property you do not own is a felony. You are not selling my house, Calvin. You are handing me the evidence I need to put you away." I reached out and snatched the paper from his hand before he could react. He lunged for it, but I stepped back. "Give that back," he screamed, his face turning purple. "No," I said, folding the paper and sliding it into my pocket next to the deed. "This is going into the evidence file. You wanted a war, Calvin? You wanted to take the only thing I had left. Congratulations, you just declared war on a federal investigator. And unlike you, I do not bluff." I looked at Kyle, who was suddenly looking very interested in the exit. "And you, Kyle," I said. "You better hope your investors do not find out you are trying to fund your company with stolen real estate." The atmosphere in the room had shifted from a party to a crime scene. I could feel the panic radiating off my parents. They had pushed too far. They had tried to take the one thing that was sacred, and in doing so they had handed me the weapon I needed to destroy them. I turned back to the door, my heart pounding not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. The gloves were off. Calvin stood there clutching the empty air where the forged document had been his face, a portrait of impotent rage. He opened his mouth to scream again, to demand the paper back, to call security, anything to regain control of the narrative he was losing so rapidly. But before he could unleash another tirade, a hand clamped firmly onto his shoulder. It was Kyle. The golden boy stepped forward, physically moving my stepfather aside, as if he were a piece of furniture that had served its purpose. Kyle adjusted his white linen jacket, flashed a blindingly fake smile at the shocked guests, and then turned his attention to me. The shift in the room was palpable. Calvin was the brute force, the bludgeon, but Kyle was the manipulator, the snake who believed he could charm the birds out of the trees before eating them. He walked toward me slowly, casually, one hand in his pocket, the other holding his wine glass by the stem. He shook his head with a look of exaggerated disappointment, like a teacher dealing with a slow student. "Sophia. Sophia. Sophia," he sighed, stopping just inside my personal space. His cologne was overpowering, a musk that smelled like money and desperation. "Let's all take a deep breath here. You are getting everyone worked up over nothing. You are being emotional, and quite frankly, it is hysterical." I stared at him, my expression unmoving. "I am not emotional, Kyle. I am legal. There is a difference. Your father-in-law just admitted to forgery." "That is not nothing." Kyle chuckled, a dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. "See, this is the problem with people like you. You get hung up on the small print. You get obsessed with the technicalities, and you miss the big picture." You are looking at a tree and missing the forest, while I am busy buying the forest and turning it into a lumber empire. He turned to the guests, spreading his arms wide. What Sophia fails to understand, because she has never operated at this level of business, is that we are talking about vision. We are talking about the future. That cottage she is so attached to. It is a rotting pile of wood in a zip code that is barely up and coming. It is a liability. It is a dead asset. It sits there collecting dust, bleeding money in taxes and insurance. It is a zero on the balance sheet. He turned back to me, his eyes cold behind his smile. But I have a vision, Sophia. I am not just going to sell the land. I am going to tokenize it. We are going to take that property, put it on the blockchain, and fractionalize ownership into NFTs. Investors from Tokyo to London will own a piece of the digital rights to the development. We are turning a dead asset into a liquid global commodity. It is revolutionary. It is Web 3. It is the kind of innovation that changes generational wealth. I listened to him spew this word salad of buzzwords, and my forensic brain almost short-circuited. He was describing a securities offering, an unregistered, unregulated securities offering backed by a property he did not own using a forged title. It was not just a Ponzi scheme. It was a federal crime so blatant it was almost impressive in its stupidity. Kyle, I said, keeping my voice level. You cannot tokenize a property you do not hold the deed to. And selling fractionalized ownership in real estate without filing with the SEC is illegal. It is called an unregistered securities offering. You are talking about committing fraud on an international scale. Kyle rolled his eyes, stepping closer until he was looming over me. He wanted to intimidate me. He wanted me to back down. There you go again, he said, shaking his head. SEC. Filings. Rules. That is old world thinking, Sophia. That is fiat currency thinking. We are disruptors. We move fast and break things. But I do not expect you to understand that. You are a bookkeeper. You look at the past. I look at the future. He leaned in, dropping his voice, so it was just for me, but loud enough that the front row of tables could hear the condescension dripping from his lips. Honestly, Sophia, you should be thanking me. You should be on your knees thanking me and your parents. We are trying to save you. We are trying to take that worthless shack and turn it into millions so that maybe, just maybe, this family does not have to be embarrassed by you anymore. We are trying to lift you out of poverty. I am trying to give you a legacy since you clearly are not capable of building one yourself. The sheer audacity of his statement was breathtaking. He was standing there wearing a suit bought with stolen money, lecturing me about poverty while I had a net worth 10 times his. But he was not done. He needed to twist the knife. He needed to make sure I knew my place. He took a half step closer, invading my personal space completely. He leaned down, bringing his mouth close to my ear. To the rest of the room, it looked like a brother-in-law sharing a private word of advice. But what he whispered was vile. It was a microaggression so sharp and precise, it was designed to cut straight to the bone of my identity. Listen to me, he whispered, his hot breath against my ear, making my skin crawl. I know concepts like decentralized finance and high-yield leverage are a little too complex for someone like you. I know your brain is not wired for this kind of sophistication. You people are better at physical things, service work, taking orders. So why don't you stick to what you are genetically good at and let the smart men handle the money? Stop trying to play dress up in that suit. We all know you are just a diversity hire who got lucky. He pulled back, a smug, triumphant grin on his face, waiting for me to shatter. He expected me to scream. He expected me to slap him. He expected me to react like the emotional, hysterical woman he had painted me to be, which would only prove his point to the room. The insult hung in the air between us, invisible to everyone else but heavy as lead to me. He had not just attacked my intelligence. He had attacked my race, my gender, and my hard-earned success in one breath.
He had dismissed my master's degree, my CPA license, and my decade of forensic experience as a diversity hire. For a split second, I saw red. I wanted to tell him exactly who I was.
I wanted to tell him that the diversity hire he was mocking was currently the lead consultant for the Department of Justice on 3 major financial crimes cases. I wanted to tell him that his smart man brain had left a digital paper trail so wide a blind man could follow it. But I did not. I swallowed the rage. I converted it into fuel. Because reacting now would only give him the satisfaction. Destroying him with facts, with evidence, with the undeniable weight of the law, that would be the true victory. I looked at him, forcing a small pitying smile onto my face. "You are right, Kyle," I said loudly, ensuring everyone heard my sudden capitulation. "I clearly do not understand your vision. It is just too advanced for me." Kyle beamed, straightening his jacket, thinking he had won. Thinking he had put the dog back in its kennel. "Exactly," he said, turning back to the crowd. "See? She admits it. No hard feelings, Sophia, just stay in your lane." I reached into my bag. My hand brushed against the cool, thick folder of the FBI indictment. "I will stay in my lane, Kyle," I said, my fingers closing around the file. "But before I go, since you are so keen on educating me about the future, I think you should see the present. You said you wanted to turn that house into a token. Well, I have a token for you too." I pulled the box toward me, the one my mother had discarded. But instead of putting it away, I opened it fully. I bypassed the deed to the house. I reached for the thickest file at the bottom, the one bound with a red rubber band. "I think you should read this," I said, my voice turning to ice. "It is a little light reading about your future." I tossed the file onto the table. It slid across the linen tablecloth, knocking over a crystal salt shaker, and came to a rest right in front of his white linen suit. The cover page was facing up. The bold black letters were impossible to miss even from a distance. United States District Court. Sealed indictment. Defendant Kyle Jenkins. Charges wire fraud securities. Fraud money laundering. Kyle looked down. His smug smile froze. His eyes bulged. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse standing upright. "What? What is this?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "It is your lane, Kyle," I said. "And you are about to crash." The silence that followed my declaration to Kyle was heavy, but it was not the silence of surrender. It was the calm before the storm. Kyle was staring at the indictment, his hands shaking so violently that the paper rattled against the table. He was trapped in his own nightmare, unable to speak, unable to spin a lie that could counter federal charges. But my mother Beatrice was not looking at the indictment. She was not looking at Kyle's terror. She was looking at me, and in her eyes I saw a desperation that bordered on madness. She did not understand wire fraud or securities laws. She only understood that I was ruining her moment. I was ruining the image of the perfect family she had curated for 3 decades. And she was not going to let me win. She marched around the table, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. She snatched the forged power of attorney from Calvin's hand and slammed it down in front of me right on top of the indictment I had just served to Kyle. "I do not care about your little printed papers," she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. "I do not care what lies you are spreading about Kyle. He is a businessman. He has enemies. That means nothing. What matters is this house. What matters is that you do what you are told." She grabbed a pen from the table and shoved it toward my chest. The tip dug into the fabric of my suit, leaving a small ink stain, but I did not flinch. "Sign it," she commanded. "Sign the consent form, right now, in front of everyone. Show them that you are a supportive sister. Show them that you are not a selfish, jealous little witch who wants to destroy her family's happiness." I looked at the pen. I looked at her manic, contorted face. She was trembling, sweat ruining her heavy makeup. She looked less like a matriarch and more like a cornered animal. "I will not sign it, Mother," I said calmly. "I will never sign it. That house is not yours to sell. It is the only thing I have left of Nana Rose, and I will burn in hell before I let you turn it into a token for a Ponzi scheme." Beatrice's face went blank for a second. The rejection did not compute. She had spent 32 years controlling me, bullying me, telling me I was worthless until I believed it. She expected me to fold. She always expected me to fold. When I did not, something inside her snapped. The sound of the slap was louder than the gunshot of a starting pistol. It echoed off the high ceilings, a sharp, wet crack that made 50 people gasp in unison. My head snapped to the side. The force of the blow was shocking. My cheek burned instantly, a throbbing heat that radiated down to my jaw. I tasted the metallic tang of copper in my mouth. My lip had split against my teeth. The room froze. The waiters stopped moving. The music seemed to die. Even Kyle looked up from his indictment, his eyes wide. Beatrice stood there, her hands still raised, her chest heaving. She did not look sorry. She looked exhilarated. She looked like she had finally done what she had wanted to do since the moment I walked in the door. "You are a freeloader," she shrieked, spitting the words at me like venom. She stepped closer, poking a manicured finger into my shoulder with every word. "A freeloader. A parasite. You have lived off us your entire life. You sucked the life out of me when you were born, and you are sucking the money out of us now. You live in that house because we let you. You eat because we fed you. You are nothing without us. Nothing." She grabbed the lapels of my suit, shaking me. "I am done with your ungratefulness. I am done with your attitude. You want to play the victim, fine. Be a victim on the street. Sign the paper or get out. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. You are dead to us. Do you hear me? Dead." I stood there, letting her shake me. I let the words wash over me. Freeloader. Parasite. Nothing. They were the same words she had used when I was 10 and spilled milk. The same words she used when I was 16 and got a B on a report card. But this time they hit differently. This time I was not a child. I reached up slowly and wiped the corner of my mouth. I pulled my hand away and looked at the smear of bright red blood on my thumb. It was a stark contrast to my dark skin. I stared at it for a long moment, letting the reality of what just happened settle into my bones. She had assaulted me. In public. In front of witnesses. The sadness that I usually felt when dealing with my family, the deep aching longing for their love, finally evaporated. It was gone. Replaced by a cold, clinical detachment. It was the same feeling I got right before I testified against a criminal in court. The switch had been flipped. The daughter was gone. The prosecutor had arrived. I looked back at her. My eyes were dry. My expression was stone. "You hit me," I stated. It was not a question. It was a fact for the record. Beatrice sneered, lowering her hands. "I should have done it years ago. Maybe it would have knocked some sense into you. Now get out, and take your trash with you." She pointed at the gift box on the table, the one she had ignored, the one she had mocked. I smoothed my jacket. I adjusted my collar. I looked at the blood on my thumb one last time, then wiped it on a napkin. "Okay," I said. My voice was terrifyingly soft. "I will go. I will leave you to your celebration. I will leave you to your police investigation." I took a step back, creating distance between us. I looked at Calvin, who was avoiding my gaze. I looked at Kyle, who was sweating through his linen suit. And finally, I looked at Beatrice, who was standing tall, thinking she had won because she had struck the first blow. But before I walk out that door, I said, my voice rising just enough to command the room, "There is one last thing. You called me a freeloader. You said I have never contributed. You said I am nothing without you." I pointed to the black velvet box sitting open on the table. The indictment was out of it, but the bottom layer was still untouched. "You refused to look in the box, Mother. You were so busy insulting me that you missed the punchline.
You saw the indictment for Kyle, but you did not see the papers underneath it. Beatrice rolled her eyes. I do not care about your papers, Sophia. Leave? I ignored her. I walked back to the table. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea. I picked up the box. I reached inside and pulled out the final stack of documents. It was bound in a blue legal folder. You should care, I said, because this paperwork answers the question you asked earlier. You asked who has been paying for this lifestyle. You asked who has been keeping the lights on. I held up the document. This is the deed to this estate, 1204 Oakwood Drive, and attached to it is the mortgage payoff confirmation from the bank. Beatrice froze. What are you talking about? We pay the mortgage. We pay the bank every month. I shook my head slowly. No, Mother. You pay a shell company called Vancorp Holdings. You have been paying them for 10 years. And do you know who owns Vancorp Holdings? I let the silence stretch. I let the horror creep into her eyes. I do, I whispered. I tossed the deed onto the table next to the indictment. I bought your debt 10 years ago when you were about to be foreclosed on. I saved you. I have been your landlord for a decade. Every time you called me a freeloader, you were living under a roof that I provided. Every time you told me I was worthless, you were eating food bought with the leniency I granted you on your late rent payments. I leaned in close, so close I could see the cracks in her foundation. I am not the parasite, Mother. I am the host, and I just decided to start the eviction. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that settled over the guests as the reality of my previous statement sank in. Beatrice was still staring at the deed on the table, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, unable to comprehend that the daughter she despised was the owner of the roof over her head. But I did not give them time to process the shift in power. I did not give them a moment to recover or to spin a new narrative. I had promised them a gift, and I was going to deliver it in full. I reached back into the black velvet box. It looked so small, so innocuous, sitting there on the white linen tablecloth, yet it held the power to dismantle their entire manufactured reality. There were 3 dossiers inside, color-coded for simplicity, because I knew my family struggled with complex truths. I bypassed the blue folder containing the house documents that were already on the table. My hand hovered over the remaining 2. I chose the green one first. Green for envy, green for greed, green for money, or in this case the complete lack thereof. I pulled the thick file out. It was heavy bound with a metal clip, the edges of the papers sharp and crisp. I turned my gaze to Kyle, the golden boy, the tech genius, the man who had just moments ago leaned into my ear and whispered that I was a diversity hire who was genetically incapable of understanding finance. He was still standing there, but his posture had collapsed. The smug arrogance had been replaced by a feral, cornered look. He was watching my hands, watching the file, and I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip, ruining his foundation. This one is for you, Kyle, I said, my voice cutting through the humid air. I did not hand it to him politely. I did not slide it across the table. I threw it. The heavy file spun through the air and struck him square in the chest with a dull thud before falling onto his empty dinner plate. The impact seemed to wake him from his trance. He looked down at the cover. There was no title, just the official seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed in stark black ink. Go ahead, I urged, stepping closer. Open it. You wanted to educate me about the future of finance. You wanted to explain how the blockchain makes you untouchable. I think you will find the contents very educational. Kyle's hands were shaking so violently that he struggled to lift the cover. When he finally did, his eyes locked onto the first page. It was a printout I had generated only 3 hours ago from a secure federal database. It was a seizure warrant. His face turned a color I had never seen on a human being before, a sickly, translucent gray. He looked like he was going to vomit right there on the rental tablecloth. What is the matter, Kyle? I asked, my tone conversational, almost pleasant. Is the terminology too complex? Let me break it down for you. You are not the CEO of a revolutionary tech startup.
You are the primary suspect in a federal investigation into a multi-state wire fraud and money laundering operation. A gasp went through the room. Uncle Marcus, who had been hanging on Kyle's every word about tax loopholes earlier, stood up, his face pale. "What is she talking about?" Kyle Marcus demanded, his voice trembling. "You said Metacoin was a sure thing. You said my 50,000 was safe." I turned to Uncle Marcus. "I am sorry, Uncle Marcus. Your 50,000 is not safe. It is not even in a crypto wallet. It is gone." I turned back to Kyle, who looked like his legs were about to give out. "Tell them, Kyle," I commanded. "Tell them what you really do. Or should I?" He could not speak. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. "I will take that as an invitation," I said. I looked around the room, making eye contact with every relative who had sneered at me, every cousin who had laughed at my Honda. "Kyle here runs what is known as a Ponzi scheme," I explained, using my lecture voice, the one I used when presenting evidence to a grand jury. "He takes money from new investors like Uncle Marcus, and instead of investing it in technology, he uses it to pay off the interest for earlier investors to keep them quiet. He also uses it to fund a lifestyle he cannot afford." I pointed to the file on the plate. "Turn to page 4, Kyle. It is the asset freeze confirmation." He did not move, so I recited it from memory. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, all assets associated with you, Jasmine, and your shell companies have been frozen by the Department of Justice. That means your bank accounts are locked. Your credit cards are dead. Even that rental Lamborghini outside the rental agency has already reported it stolen because the credit card on file was declined for the deposit an hour ago." Kyle looked at the door, his eyes darting frantically. I could see the primitive instinct to run taking over his brain. He took a step back, knocking his chair over. It clattered to the floor, a loud, jarring noise that made everyone jump. "That is a lie," he screamed, but his voice was high and thin, cracking under the weight of his fear. "She is lying. She forged these. Just like she said her dad forged the deed. She is jealous." I laughed. It was a cold, genuine laugh. "I do not need to forge anything, Kyle. I am a senior forensic accountant. I track money for a living. And do you know what I found when I looked into your accounts?" I took a step closer, driving him back until he bumped into the wall. "I found nothing. You have been bankrupt for 3 months. You have maxed out 12 credit cards in Jasmine's name. You have taken out predatory loans to pay for this party. You are not a billionaire. You are a broke con artist who is drowning in debt." I reached out and flipped the file open to a page filled with transaction logs. "Look at this, Kyle. This is a transfer of $10,000 from your business account to a site called https://www.google.com/searchq equals escapeluxury.com. That is a site that sells fake passports. You were planning to run, weren't you? You knew the walls were closing in. You were going to take whatever money you could get from my parents selling my house, and you were going to leave Jasmine behind to deal with the fallout." The room erupted. Jasmine let out a wail of disbelief, grabbing Kyle's arm. "What is she talking about? Kyle, fake passports? You said we were going to Dubai for a brand trip." Kyle shoved her off him, his facade completely crumbling. He was not the suave businessman anymore. He was a rat trapped in a cage. "Shut up, Jasmine," he yelled. "You spend money like it grows on trees." I had to do something. I watched them turn on each other, the predictable result of a relationship built on lies. But I was not done with Kyle. "There is one more thing," I said, silencing them. "The FBI knows you are here." Kyle froze. When I printed that file, it triggered an alert. I lied smoothly, though in reality I had manually tipped them off. But he did not need to know the specifics. He just needed to know that his time was up. "They know your location. They know you are a flight risk. And seeing as you are currently trespassing on my property, I have every right to hold you here until they arrive." Kyle looked at the front door. It was 50 feet away. He looked at me. He looked at the window. He was calculating the odds, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face and staining the collar of his white linen suit. "I would not run if I were you," I advised softly. The security guard at the gate, the one who tried to stop me, I showed him my badge on the way in. He is currently locking the main gate. There is no way out, Kyle. His knees finally gave way. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, clutching the green file to his chest like a shield. The room watched in horror as the man they had worshipped just an hour ago dissolved into a puddle of fear and incompetence. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just the clinical detachment of a job well done. "Happy anniversary," I said to the room. "One fraud down, 2 to go." I turned back to the table and reached for the pink file. The room was silent, terrified of what was coming next. They realized now that the box was not a gift, it was a weapon, and I had plenty of ammunition left. Kyle sat huddled on the floor, a broken man clutching his indictment like a security blanket, but the silence that followed was not one of pity. It was the silence of a pack of wolves, realizing there was another wounded animal in the clearing. I turned my gaze slowly, deliberately toward my sister Jasmine, the golden child, the influencer, the lifestyle coach who claimed to manifest wealth through positive thinking and hashtags. She was standing by the table, her hands trembling as she clutched her champagne glass, the liquid inside rippling with her fear. She looked at Kyle with disgust, trying to physically distance herself from him, inching away as if failure were a contagious disease she could catch. "I didn't know," Jasmine stammered, looking at our parents and the stunned guests. Her voice was high and breathless, a performance of innocence she had perfected over 3 decades. "I had no idea he was doing that. I am a victim here too. He lied to me. He used me." She looked at me, her eyes pleading for a lifeline, thinking that maybe I would spare her because we shared blood. "Sophia, you believe me, right?" she asked, tears welling up in her eyes on command. "You know I would never be involved in anything illegal. I have my own brand. I have my own money. I am a businesswoman." I stared at her, and for a moment I remembered us as children. I remembered how she would break a vase and put the pieces in my bed so I would get blamed. I remembered how she stole money from my grandmother's purse and told everyone I did it to buy candy. She hadn't changed, she had just scaled up her operations. I reached into the black box and pulled out the pink folder. It was thick, bulging with papers, the corners slightly dog-eared from the sheer volume of evidence inside. Jasmine saw the color and her face went from pale to ghostly white. She knew that shade of pink. It was the same color as the delinquency notices she had been hiding in her glove compartment for months. "You are right, Jasmine," I said, my voice smooth and deadly. "You are a businesswoman. But the business you are in isn't lifestyle coaching. It is professional fraud." I tossed the pink folder onto the table. It slid across the surface, knocking over the empty champagne bottle and landed right in front of her. The impact sounded like a gavel striking a block. "Open it," I commanded. Jasmine shook her head, taking a step back. "No, I don't need to see your fake papers. Mom, tell her to stop." Beatrice, who was still recovering from the shock of Kyle's downfall, tried to rally. She stepped forward, her maternal instinct to protect her favorite child overriding her common sense. "Leave her alone," Sophia, Beatrice yelled. "Jasmine has nothing to do with Kyle's mess. She is successful. She has sponsorships. She just bought us a cruise." I laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. "The cruise," I repeated. "The 5-star Mediterranean voyage. Open the folder. Mother. Look at page 3. Beatrice hesitated, then grabbed the folder. She flipped it open aggressively, desperate to prove me wrong. But as her eyes scanned the page, her defiance melted into confusion. "What is this?" Beatrice whispered. "It says, declined." "It is a notification from the travel agency," I explained to the room. "Jasmine put the $500 deposit on a credit card that was maxed out 6 months ago. The transaction was declined instantly. There is no cruise, Mother. There are no tickets. There is just a pretty brochure she picked up for free to buy your affection for the night." Jasmine let out a sob. I was going to fix it. I was waiting for a brand deal to clear. There are no brand deals, Jasmine. I cut her off. I turned to the guests, raising my voice so everyone could hear the autopsy of her lie. My sister claims to be an influencer with 1 million followers, but if you look at the forensic analysis of her social media accounts on page 10, you will see that 80% of those followers are bots bought from a click farm in Russia. Her engagement is fake, her comments are automated. She has zero income from Instagram. Not a dime. I pointed at the shimmering gold dress she was wearing. That dress! It still has the security tag on the inside hem because she planned to return it tomorrow. I spoke to the manager at Neiman Marcus this morning. They are watching the security footage of her shoplifting earrings as we speak. Jasmine gasped, clutching her chest. You are a liar. You are just jealous because I am beautiful and you are nothing. I ignored her tantrum and pointed to the window where the lime green sports car sat. And the Porsche. The one she drove here to impress you all. It is a rental just like Kyle's. But unlike Kyle, she didn't use company money. She used a loan shark. I walked over to the table and flipped the folder to a section marked with red sticky notes. These are high-interest payday loans, I said, tapping the paper. 12 of them, all taken out in the last 6 months. She owes over $40,000 to predatory lenders who are currently blowing up her phone. That is why she has been checking it every 30 seconds. She is terrified they are going to show up here. The room was buzzing with whispers. Cousins were pulling out their phones, likely unfollowing Jasmine in real time. But I wasn't done. I had saved the worst for last. The thing that would sever the bond between mother and golden child forever. Beatrice looked at Jasmine, her expression a mix of heartbreak and denial. Jasmine, is this true? Are you really in debt? Jasmine cried, mascara running down her cheeks. Mom, it is just a cash flow problem. I am an entrepreneur. You know how it is. I just needed a bridge loan. I stepped between them. It is not just debt, Mother, I said softly. It is theft. I turned the folder to the very last page. It was a credit report. But it wasn't Jasmine's credit report. The name at the top was Beatrice Vance. Mom, I said, looking her in the eye. Do you remember when you lost your wallet last Thanksgiving, and Jasmine found it for you 2 days later? Beatrice nodded slowly. Yes, she found it in the couch cushions. She didn't find it, I said. She stole it. And she copied your social security number and your driver's license. I tapped the credit report. Look at this list, Mother. 5 credit cards opened in your name in the last 6 months. The total balance is $85,000. She maxed them all out. She bought that fake Birkin bag with your credit. She paid for her lip injections with your credit. She has been living like a queen by destroying your financial future. Beatrice looked at the paper. She saw the list of banks: Chase, Amex, Discover. She saw the balances: 15,000, 20,000, 30,000. She saw the dates. They matched the times Jasmine had come over for dinner, the times Jasmine had hugged her and told her she loved her. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Beatrice stumbled back, gripping the edge of the table to keep from falling. She looked at Jasmine, her precious, perfect daughter, with a look of absolute horror. You stole from me," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. Jasmine wiped her eyes, her face hardening. I didn't steal, I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back once Metacoin took off. I did it for us, Mom. I did it so we could look good. You always said appearance matters. You said we had to look rich. I was just doing what you taught me. Jasmine pointed a finger at Beatrice, screaming now. You pushed me to be this way. You told me to find a rich husband. You told me to buy expensive clothes. You told me Sophia was a loser because she worked a boring job. Well, I tried, Mom. I tried to be the star you wanted. So don't look at me like that. This is your bill too. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Beatrice looked from the credit report to her daughter, seeing her own vanity reflected back at her in the most twisted, destructive way possible. She had created a monster, and that monster had just eaten her retirement fund. I closed the pink folder. She has a point, Mother, I said calmly. You wanted a golden child. You wanted someone who valued image over substance. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for, a daughter who is all shine and no gold. And now, thanks to her, your credit score is lower than your IQ. I stepped back, leaving them in the wreckage of their own making. Kyle was broken on the floor. Jasmine was exposed as a thief. And Beatrice was realizing that the daughter she idolized was the one who had stabbed her in the back. I turned to the final stack of papers on the table. The blue folder. The deed. The house. It was time for the final blow. It was time to remind them who really owned the stage they were standing on. I stood on the top step of the porch, the humid Atlanta air filling my lungs, but I did not walk to my car just yet. The show had a grand finale, and I was the director. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, unlocking the screen to see a text message from the lead agent I had been coordinating with for the past week. It was a simple thumbs-up emoji. I looked up at the sky, counting down silently in my head. 3, 2, 1. The silence of the wealthy neighborhood was shattered by the wail of sirens. It started as a distant whine, growing louder and more piercing with every second until it was a deafening roar that vibrated in my chest. Blue and red strobe lights erupted from the end of the long driveway, washing over the manicured lawn and the rented luxury cars in a chaotic, disorienting rhythm. One by one, unmarked black SUVs and marked police cruisers tore up the pavement, screeching to a halt in a formation that blocked every possible exit. I turned back toward the open door of the house. The guests inside were frozen, their faces bathed in the pulsating emergency lights that flooded through the large bay windows. The party was officially over. A team of federal agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI moved with practiced efficiency, flanked by uniformed sheriff deputies. They did not knock. They stormed up the steps, bypassing me with a nod of recognition, and flooded into the foyer. I followed them, slowly leaning against the doorframe to witness the inevitable conclusion of Kyle's fraudulent empire. Kyle was still on the floor where I had left him, clutching the green indictment file. When he saw the agents enter the fight, left his body completely. He did not run. He did not scream. He simply curled into a ball, trying to make himself small, trying to disappear into the expensive rug he had claimed to own just an hour ago. Kyle Jenkins, a lead agent, shouted, his voice commanding the room. "Federal agents, show me your hands right now." Kyle raised his shaking hands slowly. 2 agents hauled him to his feet. He looked small, pathetic, stripped of the arrogance that had defined him. He looked at Jasmine, then at the guests, and finally his eyes found mine at the doorway. There was no hatred left in them, only terror. "Turn around!" the agent barked, spinning Kyle against the wall. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and final. Click, click. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." The agent recited, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they marched him out, Kyle began to sob. It was an ugly, guttural sound. "Please," he begged, to no one in particular. "It was a mistake. I can fix it. I just need time." But there was no time left. The guests, the same people who had laughed at my Honda, were now holding up their phones, recording every second of his humiliation. They were live-streaming the downfall of the man they had envied, hungry for the content. The agents were not done. Another officer, a woman with a stern face and a clipboard, walked straight toward Jasmine. My sister was standing by the buffet table, looking like a deer in headlights, clutching her fake Birkin bag, as if it could protect her. "Jasmine Vance?" the officer asked. Jasmine nodded, unable to speak. Her face streaked with mascara tears. The officer handed her a thick envelope. It was not handcuffs, not yet, but it was the next best thing. "This is a court summons," the officer stated flatly. You are being named as a person of interest in a federal investigation regarding identity theft and credit card fraud. You are ordered to surrender your passport immediately. Do not leave the state of Georgia. If you fail to appear at the hearing on Tuesday, a warrant will be issued for your arrest. Jasmine stared at the paper in her hands. The word, summons, was printed in bold block letters. She looked at the guests filming her. She looked at her perfect life crumbling into dust. Mom Jasmine wailed, turning to Beatrice. Do something. They are ruining my reputation. But Beatrice could do nothing. She stood by the fireplace holding on to Calvin for support, watching her golden world disintegrate. She looked old. She looked tired. She looked at the police, then at the empty spot where Kyle had been, and finally she looked at me. I pushed off the doorframe and walked back into the room. The police gave me space. The guests parted instantly, terrified that I might have a dossier on them too. I walked straight to my parents. Beatrice was trembling. Sophia, she whispered, please, tell them to stop. This is a family matter. I shook my head. No, mother. Theft is a criminal matter. Fraud is a federal matter. Family has nothing to do with it anymore. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out the final piece of paper I had prepared. It was a single sheet, crisp and white, with the letterhead of my law firm at the top. It was the only paper left in my arsenal, and it was the one that would sever our ties forever. I held it out to Calvin. He looked at it, his hands shaking too much to take it, so I placed it gently on the mantelpiece next to their anniversary photo. This is for you, I said, my voice calm amidst the chaos of the police radio chatter. What is it? Calvin croaked, his voice barely audible. It is an eviction notice, I explained. It is a notice to quit possession. I pointed to the timestamp I had written on the bottom. In the state of Georgia, when a tenant allows illegal activity to take place on the property, the landlord has the right to terminate the lease immediately for the safety of the premises. Kyle was running a criminal enterprise from this living room. Jasmine was committing identity theft from the guest bedroom. I looked Beatrice in the eye. You have 24 hours. By this time tomorrow, I want this house empty. I want your clothes, your furniture, and your delusions of grandeur gone. If you are still here at 5 p.m. tomorrow, the deputies standing outside will return to forcibly remove you for trespassing. Beatrice let out a sob, reaching for my arm. Sophia, you can't. This is our home. We have nowhere to go. We are bankrupt. You know we are bankrupt. You can't throw your own parents on the street. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. I can, mother, and I am. You spent 30 years telling me I was worthless. You spent tonight trying to steal the one thing my grandmother left me. You made your choice. You chose the fake son-in-law. You chose the liar. You chose the image over the reality. I gestured around the room, at the police, at the crying sister, at the handcuffed man being shoved into a cruiser outside. This is the reality you chose. I am just balancing the ledger. I turned my back on them. I walked through the foyer, past the stunned guests, who were now silent, realizing that the black sheep was the wolf who had eaten them all. I walked out onto the porch and down the steps. The blue lights danced across my skin. I walked past the rental Rolls-Royce that would soon be repossessed. I walked past the tow truck that was already backing up to hook the Lamborghini. I got into my 2012 Honda Civic. I started the engine. It purred to life, reliable and real. As I pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. I saw my mother and father standing in the doorway, framed by the flashing lights of the police cars, looking out at the darkness. They were alone. They were exposed. And for the first time in my life, I was free. I drove down the winding driveway, leaving the sirens and the screams behind. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of the tires on the pavement, driving toward a future that belonged only to me. 6 months have passed since the flashing blue lights faded from the driveway of the estate on Oakwood Drive,
And sometimes it feels like that chaotic night belonged to a different lifetime entirely. I am standing on the balcony of my new penthouse on the 45th floor of the Sovereign Building in downtown Atlanta. The wind up here is cooler, cleaner, and carries the scent of rain washing over the city. Below me, the cars are just streams of light moving through the veins of the city, silent and distant. It is quiet up here. It is the kind of silence I used to dream about when I was living in the guest room of my own house, listening to my parents scream about money and status. This silence does not feel empty. It feels like victory. On the mahogany desk inside my home office sits a framed copy of this month's Forbes magazine. My face is on the cover. I am wearing the same black suit that my mother called a funeral outfit, but the editors didn't seem to mind. The headline reads, "The Forensic Hunter: How Sophia Vance is Redefining Corporate Justice." It is ironic that the very thing my family mocked me for, my obsession with details, my rigidity, my refusal to bend the rules, is the very thing that has catapulted me into the national spotlight. Since the news of how I dismantled a Ponzi scheme at a family party broke, my firm has been overwhelmed. We are turning away clients. I have hired 5 new investigators and doubled the salary of my assistant. The bookkeeper is doing just fine. But success is sweetest when you know exactly who is not sharing in it. I have kept tabs on them, of course, not out of love, but out of a professional habit of tracking liabilities. Kyle Jenkins did not get his moon landing. The federal justice system moves surprisingly fast when the evidence is delivered in a color-coded box by a witness who knows exactly where the bodies are buried. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of securities fraud to avoid a 20-year sentence. He is currently serving 8 years in a federal correctional facility in Florida. I heard through a contact at the bureau that he works in the prison kitchen now. The man who refused to touch a door handle without a sanitizer wipe is now scrubbing grease traps for 12 cents an hour. His linen suits have been replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that definitely was not tailored in Milan. He sends me letters sometimes. I never open them. They go straight into the shredder, unread and unacknowledged. Jasmine's fall from grace was less legal and more social, which for her is a fate worse than prison. She avoided jail time by turning state's witness against her husband, claiming she was a naive victim of his manipulation. The prosecutor bought it mostly because he couldn't believe anyone could be as genuinely incompetent as she appeared to be without practicing. But escaping prison didn't mean escaping the debt. The $85,000 she stole from our mother is still owed, along with the $40,000 in payday loans. I saw her last week. I was driving past a diner on the outskirts of the city, a place with flickering neon signs and a C health rating. I saw a woman in a stained yellow uniform wiping down a table near the window. She looked older. The Botox had dissolved, leaving lines of stress around her mouth. The hair extensions were gone, replaced by a messy bun held back by a hairnet. It was Jasmine. She was being yelled at by a customer for spilling coffee, and for the first time in her life she didn't talk back. She just nodded, took the abuse, and kept wiping. She has to. The court garnishes 50% of her wages before she even sees a paycheck. She is finally learning what it means to actually work for a living, one sticky quarter at a time. And then there are Beatrice and Calvin. Their eviction was executed exactly 24 hours after the party. My security team arrived at 8 in the morning. They didn't find them packing. They found them sitting in the living room waiting for a miracle that never came. They left with 4 suitcases and a box of silverware that my security chief made them put back because it was listed on the inventory of the estate. They live in a 300-square-foot studio apartment in a dilapidated building near the airport now. It is all they can afford on their Social Security checks. The country club membership is gone. The leased cars were repossessed the day after the party, but the true punishment for Beatrice isn't the poverty. It is the irrelevance. Aunt Patrice, who has suddenly decided she wants to be my best friend and calls me weekly to gossip, told me about their new life. She said Beatrice tries to tell the neighbors in her building that she used to be wealthy. She hangs out in the communal laundry room trying to hold court with people who are just trying to wash their work clothes. She tells them stories about her rich daughter. But she doesn't brag about Jasmine anymore. She brags about me. She bought a copy of Forbes with her grocery money and shows it to strangers saying, "That is my Sophia. I raised her to be tough." She takes credit for my success rewriting history to make herself the hero who forged me in fire. It is a pathetic, desperate attempt to cling to a shred of status. The old friends they tried so hard to impress at the anniversary party have all ghosted them. No one wants to be associated with the parents of a convict and a fraud. They are social pariahs isolated in a cramped room with thin walls, forced to listen to each other's breathing, and the constant reminder of what they threw away. I turn away from the city view and walk back into my living room. It is spacious, filled with modern art and furniture that I bought with my own money. There are no rental tags on the drapes here. There are no fake flowers. Everything is real. Everything is solid. I pour myself a glass of vintage wine, a bottle that costs more than the monthly rent of my parents' new apartment. I sit on the velvet sofa and take a sip, letting the rich, complex flavor settle on my tongue. I am 32 years old. I am alone in this massive penthouse, but for the first time in my life, I am not lonely. I have my dignity, I have my name, and I have the absolute certainty that I will never ever be a freeloader in anyone's story again. The black sheep has not just left the flock. She has bought the farm, evicted the wolves, and built a castle on the hill. And the view from here is absolutely magnificent. The vibration of my phone against the marble countertop was a harsh, mechanical intrusion into the serenity of my evening. It was a Tuesday, late enough that business calls should have ceased, but early enough that the city lights outside my window were just beginning their nightly dance. I was standing in the kitchen of my penthouse, uncorking a bottle of Cabernet that had been breathing for the last hour. The label was French. The vintage was rare, and I had bought it simply because I could. I poured the dark red liquid into a crystal glass, listening to the glug and swirl, ignoring the persistent buzzing of the device on the island. I glanced at the screen. Unknown caller. I usually let these go to voicemail. My assistant handles the press and my lawyers handle the threats. But something about the persistence of the ringing, the way it started and stopped and then started again, immediately triggered a familiar instinct. It was the rhythm of desperation. It was the frantic, erratic tempo of someone who had run out of options. I knew who it was before I even slid my thumb across the screen. I had blocked their numbers on every platform, blocked their emails, and even flagged their names with the building security to ensure they could never step foot in the lobby. But scammers always find a new number. It is the nature of the parasite to seek a new way into the host. I picked up the phone and pressed answer, but I did not speak. I simply held the device to my ear and waited. I listened to the frantic breathing on the other end, the sound of background traffic, the unmistakable static of a cheap, prepaid phone plan. Sophia. Is that you, Sophia? Please don't hang up. The voice was unrecognizable at first. It was cracked, hoarse, stripped of all the polish and pretension that had defined Beatrice Vance for decades. It sounded like an old woman. It sounded like a stranger. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel the distance between us. I wanted her to feel the weight of the months of silence. "It is your father," Beatrice rushed on, the words tumbling out in a panic that felt rehearsed. "It is Calvin. He collapsed. We are at the emergency room. They say it is his heart. They say he needs a procedure right now tonight, or he is not going to make it. But we don't have insurance. You know we lost the insurance when the assets were seized. They won't operate without a deposit. Sophia, please, it is $5,000. Just 5,000. That is nothing to you. You have to help us. He is going to die." I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the red legs run down the side of the crystal. My forensic brain engaged, automatically dissecting her plea like a fraudulent tax return. First, emergency rooms in the United States are legally required to stabilize patients regardless of their ability to pay. If Calvin were truly dying, they would be operating, not asking for a deposit. Second, $5,000 was a suspiciously round number.
It was the exact amount needed to put a deposit on a rental apartment in the city, or perhaps to buy a used car to replace the ones they lost. She was lying. She was using the hypothetical death of her husband as a lever to pry open my wallet. It was a low tactic even for her. I walked over to the window looking out at the skyline. I pressed the speakerphone button so I wouldn't have to hold her voice so close to my head. I am sorry to hear that I said my voice cool and detached. If it is a medical emergency, I can call the hospital administration directly and have them send the bill to my legal team for review. Which hospital are you at, Beatrice? There was a pause on the other line, a hesitation. The scam had hit a wall of logic. We are at Grady, she stammered. But there is no time for reviews. They need cash. They need a credit card over the phone. Just give me the number. Sophia, I will write it down. I smiled into the reflection of the glass. Grady Memorial is a public hospital. They do not turn people away. And they certainly do not demand credit card numbers over the phone for life-saving surgery. You are lying, Mother, I said simply. The line went silent for a moment, and then the pretense dropped. The weeping grandmother act vanished, replaced by the bitter, sharp-edged woman I remembered. Fine, she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. Fine. He is not dying, but we are. Do you know how we are living? Do you know what it is like to sleep on a mattress on the floor with cockroaches? Do you know what it is like to eat canned beans every night? We are your parents. We raised you. We sacrificed for you, and you are sitting up there in your ivory tower swimming in money while we rot. I walked out onto the balcony, the night wind catching the silk of my blouse. The city air was crisp. You are describing the consequences of your own actions, Beatrice, I said. You committed fraud. You stole. You squandered every opportunity I gave you. This is not my doing. This is gravity. Sophia, listen to me, she pleaded, switching tactics again, trying to find an emotional hook. I know you. I know my daughter. Underneath all those suits and that cold exterior, you are still my little girl. You have a good heart. You are not cruel. You loved us once. I know you still love us. You can't just turn off your feelings like a light switch. You are the one who saved us 10 years ago. That is who you are. You are a savior. Please, just this once, just help us get back on our feet. We will never ask for anything again. I promise. She was good. I had to give her that. She knew exactly where the old wounds were. She knew that for 30 years my entire existence had revolved around trying to prove I was good enough, trying to buy their love with my competence, trying to be the savior she claimed I was. She was betting that the little girl who craved approval was still in there desperate for a crumb of validation. But she was betting on a ghost. I looked down at the street 45 stories below. The cars looked like toys. The people looked like ants. From this height, the past looked very small. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the city and the expensive wine. I felt absolutely nothing for the woman on the phone. No anger, no sadness, no guilt. Just a mild inconvenience that I was about to correct. I am sorry, madam, I said, my voice polite and final as if I were speaking to a telemarketer. What? Beatrice asked, confused. What do you mean? I mean you have made a mistake, I continued. You are looking for Sophia the Savior, Gisa. You are looking for the girl who wanted your approval. You are looking for the daughter who thought she owed you her life. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy between us. But you have the wrong number. Sophia. Stop it, Beatrice cried. Stop playing games. I am not playing, I said softly. That Sophia died on the night of your anniversary. You killed her when you called her a freeloader. You killed her when you slapped her. The person you are speaking to now is a stranger. And strangers do not give you $5,000. Sophia. Don't you dare hang up on me. I am your mother. You owe me goodbye. Beatrice, I said. I tapped the red icon on the screen. The screaming stopped instantly.
The silence rushed back in, filling the penthouse, but this time it was richer, deeper. I tapped the info button next to the number and selected block caller. Then, for good measure, I went into my settings and changed my number entirely, a process I had initiated with my carrier earlier that day. It was done. The last line was cut. I walked back inside and set the phone down on the desk. I picked up my wine glass and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling metropolis of Atlanta. The city was alive, pulsing with energy, a million stories being written in the lights below. My story was no longer written by them. It was no longer defined by their debts, their lies, or their conditional love. I had balanced the ledger. I had closed the case. I raised my glass to the reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me was strong. She was successful. She was whole. She was wearing a suit that she paid for, standing in a home that she owned, living a life that was finally undeniably hers. To the freeloader, I whispered to the empty room, "May she rest in peace." I took a long drink of the wine. It tasted like blackberries and oak. It tasted like victory. It tasted like freedom. I looked out at the horizon where the lights of the city met the darkness of the sky. I smiled, and then I reached out and turned off the lamp on my desk, plunging the room into darkness, leaving only the city lights to guide me into my future. My journey taught me that shared blood does not guarantee loyalty. For years, I internalized their insults, believing I was a burden simply because I refused to participate in their shallow facade. But the moment I stopped auditioning for a role in their theater of lies, I discovered my true power. We often fear losing family, but sometimes letting go of toxic ties is the only way to save yourself. You are not defined by the labels placed on you by insecure people. Your worth is inherent. Your success is yours to own, and peace is worth every price you pay. If this story inspired you to stand your ground against those who underestimate you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs strength, and subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers.